but they come and go, as with many things with Donald Trump. He wants this done. He wants it to add to the other 8 conflicts he's brought to a halt in the first 11 months of his administration, to put that on the roster of achievements for the Nobel Committee. And he doesn't really care what the substance of the Ukraine-Russia deal is. He couldn't care less, as long as it gets the parties to agreement.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've got former National Security Advisor and former Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, on the program. And just a reminder that you can watch us every day, Monday through Friday, on Times Ready as YouTube, or you can stream us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report again.
Glad to be with you.
We have to start off with, of course, the news coming out of Germany, which is, of course, we've seen the EU leaders, the US and Ukraine. They've wrapped up 2 days of talks in Germany. We saw Friedrich Merz say that a ceasefire is now conceivable for the first time. Or we've also seen Donald Trump say that he thinks a peace deal is closer now than ever before. But Ambassador, we've been down this road many times before. Are you as optimistic as these leaders appear to be?
Well, I'm not. I think there's still a lot of areas that are very much in dispute with Russia. And I'm also never really satisfied until I see the actual language on key points. In this case, specifically, the security guarantees that the United States is apparently offering to Ukraine. I would say if the reports are correct, the security guarantees are offered for a limited time only, meaning that I think they're being used as pressure, perhaps on territorial concessions that Zelensky and the Ukrainians don't want to make. So it's hardly a sign of good faith to say, by gosh, we'll be there with you if the Russians attack again, but only if you respond within the next 10 days. I mean, that tells you something about the security guarantees to begin with. And I think everybody should understand that Ukraine gets these guarantees only by giving up the possibility of joining NATO for the foreseeable future. So I'm color me dubious at this point.
Ukraine had, as you mentioned, Ambassador, Ukraine made this concession this week when Zelensky said, look, they're willing to withdraw their desires to become a part of NATO in order to get other things over the line. So we've now seen Donald Trump say that the US, along with Western allies, will commit to Article 5-like protection for Ukraine, which would mean defense assurances if Ukraine is attacked again. But is that enough? Is an Article 5-like guarantee enough?
Well, it's either written like Article 5 or it's not. So let's start with Article 5. How many people across Europe think Donald Trump is absolutely committed to America's obligations under Article 5? This is a man who in the 2024 campaign said if European members are not meeting their target of 2% of GDP, now, by the way, 3.5% of GDP, 5% counting fuzzier defense-related activities, so he said that. He's never really retracted it. I think he still believes it. If he's not really committed to Article 5, how committed is Donald Trump to Article 5-like guarantees? I think, Zelensky needs to remember the old saying, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. If you want to take a guarantee from Donald Trump, good luck is all I can say.
Zelensky has been adamant that if Article 5-like guarantees, if security protection is agreed upon from the Trump administration, that he wants it voted on in US Congress to ensure that it's protected, that it's respected for years to come. Do you think this will happen? And do you agree with President Zelensky that this is an important part of securing these guarantees?
Well, I think if that kind of language were put in front of the Senate, which has the responsibility to give advice and consent on treaties, the House would not play a role. I think the Senate would agree to it by the required 2/3 majority. I think, and I've believed for a long time, Ukraine has much stronger support in Congress than it does in the White House. But the language that's reported, or the concept reported, is consistent with national procedures. And that's not far different from Article 5, but it also means national procedures is, in our case, the president has to agree to do something. And if he doesn't agree to do something, if he thinks Zelensky provoked Putin in a year or two, there are plenty of ways to get out of this. And at least as far as I've seen reported, there's no commitment by the United States to put American troops in Ukraine. which when we're serious, the American troops are the tripwire. That's why American troops are still in Europe. It's why they're still in South Korea and Japan. No American troops in Ukraine means it's a long way from the East Coast to Ukraine.
What kind of security guarantees do you think the US should be putting forward to Ukraine to ensure this protection then?
Well, I'm not. Let's come to Russia, which actually has a say in this matter too. I don't know how Putin is going to react to that if he doesn't get the territorial concessions in the Donbass that he wants. And Putin and Trump have had conversations recently, according to Trump. So Putin may have a different understanding of what the guarantees are. I don't think Putin's serious about peace until Russian troops are moving back toward Russia. As long as they're advancing in Ukraine, however slowly, at whatever painful human cost in terms of casualties, Putin thinks he's still winning. He thinks time is on his side. He's not in any rush for a peace agreement. What he does not want, and of course neither does Zelensky, is to be blamed by Trump for torpedoing what's Trump's real objective here, which is the Nobel Peace Prize.
So security guarantees are closer to securing, according to Frederick Merz, according to the US, but territorial concessions do remain a topic of tension, especially as Ukraine says that concessions on territory are their red line, and Russia responded to the Berlin talks by saying that they will not make any sort of concessions on territory. So while we see Donald Trump coming out and saying that we are closer than ever to a peace deal, territory really keeps us still at a standstill. Is that your takeaway from it?
Yeah, this is a huge issue for both Ukraine and Russia. Look, what Trump's trying to achieve here is a peace deal before January 31st. Why? Because under the Nobel Peace Prize Committee rules, you have to be nominated by January the 31st to get an award in that year. And if Ukraine is not successfully brought to a peaceful resolution by then, it kicks his Nobel Peace Prize one more year down the road in the best light. Trump has said within the past few weeks, deadlines are useful while it looks like you're getting close to something to put pressure on people, but deadlines they come and go, as with many things with Donald Trump. He wants this done. He wants it to add to the other 8 conflicts he's brought to a halt in the first 11 months of his administration, to put that on the roster of achievements for the Nobel Committee. And he doesn't really care what the substance of the Ukraine-Russia deal is. He couldn't care less, as long as it gets the parties to agreement.
So you think that he's willing to sell Ukraine out in order to get a peace deal over the line, in order to make this, deadline of January?
Well, if he thought he could get Ukraine to agree, that's why this condition, or this, as reported in the press, that Ukraine, basically what it says is, take this security guarantee that we're offering you, because if you don't take it soon, we're going to withdraw it. As I say, if you're looking for indications of good faith from Donald Trump, threatening the person that you're trying to get to agree to something, it doesn't show you have the greatest confidence in what you're putting forward. And that ought to be a real red flag to Ukraine and to Europeans.
Ambassador, does it seem like to you that Ukraine has been told to pick between security guarantees and territorial concessions, that if they give up territory, then they'll be awarded security to avoid further aggression in years to come, and if they don't do that, then they won't get security? So it almost seems as if getting both is off the cards, that the US will not allow them to have both, given that, Putin will never sign off on that anyway.
Yeah, it could well be this is Putin's proposition. But he said, I don't want Ukraine in NATO, because he really does fear the NATO alliance and fears what the reaction would be. Security guarantees, that is much vaguer. And I think what Putin really wants is the extra territory, because if he got it without having to expend Russian forces, that would be a significant victory and a significant retreat for Ukraine. We're not just talking about acres of farmland here. The territory in question is sometimes called part of Ukraine's fortress belt. In other words, it's very heavily defended, and it's one reason why the Russians haven't succeeded in taking control of it already after almost 4 years of war. So Ukraine would be giving up not just square mileage, it would be giving up a substantial part of its defenses against potential further Russian incursion.
Dmitry Peskov was asked whether he thought a peace deal could be in place by Christmas, and he responded saying, "I can only speak for the Russian side, for President Putin. He is open to peace, to a serious peace, serious decisions. He is absolutely not open to any tricks aimed at stalling for time." I mean, Ambassador, this has to be one of the most ironic things that the Russians have said so far, that Russia won't tolerate Ukraine and Western leaders stalling for time.
Right. Well, I know Peskov. I've seen him in action. He speaks what Putin wants him to speak. He's very faithful to his leader, and I'm sure this is Putin enjoying himself because he's saying to Trump, it's the Europeans that are preventing you from getting the Nobel Peace Prize because they're not going to agree before January 31st. So he's feeding into Trump's eagerness to get the prize, and I think that's just a way of exploiting it. Hey, we're sitting here in Moscow, we're ready to talk, we're open to all this. It's these Europeans that keep complicating things.
Britain has pledged £600 million worth of air defences to support Ukraine on Tuesday as Kyiv braces for winter attacks coming up. But in conjunction with that, the UK's Chief of Defence Staff has warned that the growing Russian threat means that the nation must be honest, and conflict potentially escalating could lead to British sons and daughters may need to fight. So that's a pretty blunt and somber statement to make, Ambassador. Do you see negotiations failing or falling flat, prompting intervention on the ground from the UK?
Well, I think if these negotiations fail for whatever reason, I think this could be the point where Trump just pulls back and says, "Okay, I've tried. I'm giving up on this. I'm going to go do something else." I think he's come close to that several times before, but Starmer and others in Europe have kept him in the negotiations. But if walking away means just not engaging in further diplomatic activity, that's one thing. If walking away means refusing to sell weapons and ammunition to European NATO members that in turn are passed on to Ukraine, if it means withholding American military intelligence from Ukraine, that's very serious. So I think an American kind of backing away from Ukraine would require more effort by European members of NATO and could well involve commitments of forces on the ground. That in fact may be, and if the U.S. forces were included particularly, that may be what gets Putin's attention, that this time everybody really is serious about not having any further Russian advances. But I don't see other European nations being willing to jump forward. I don't see the Germans volunteering. This whole concept of a peacekeeping force in Ukraine has, to my knowledge, never been adequately defined, what its rules of engagement are, and how far people are willing to take that risk.
So if the US backed out of peace talks but continued to provide intelligence, continued to sell weapons to NATO and European countries, do you think that Europe would be able to help Ukraine on its own, go at this on their own?
Yeah, if they had the will. There's new polling out from Politico that shows a reduction in support for Ukraine, particularly in France and Germany. And I think Putin's also a pretty astute observer of Germany, especially given his service there. So I think one thing that he's been calculating is when European resolve flags. He knows where Trump is. He knows what Trump wants. It has nothing to do with national security or Ukraine or NATO or anything else. It has to do, as always, with Donald Trump. But if he sees a flagging in resolve in Britain, which has not been the case yet, but if that happens in France, Germany, other major supporters of Ukraine, he would certainly try and work that to his advantage, no doubt about it, because that reduction in resolve translates into Russian success on the battlefield.
In the last day, Ukraine has said that it struck and disabled a Russian submarine in a unique special operation using underwater naval drones. It's a wartime first for Ukraine, saying that Russian naval assets are no longer safe anywhere. So Russia has, of course, denied that any serious damage took place, but it does show that Ukraine's striking capabilities are improving, especially in the Black Sea, where most of Russia's fleet are based. But Ambassador, can you run me through what this looks like in terms of a successful operation?
Well, Right now, estimates in the West are that about 1/3 of Russia's Black Sea fleet is on the bottom of the Black Sea right now. So we've apparently seen Ukraine add to that total. And if they are making advances with underwater drones, that's very significant. There's been a lot of attention, and rightly so, on the advances in technology and tactics of drones in the air, both to striking offensively, but for defensive purposes. And people should realize this is coming in naval warfare, on the surface, subsurface, no doubt about it. On land warfare, same thing. And so if Ukraine has gotten a lead on the Russians in underwater drone capabilities, that makes the Russian Black Sea fleet very dangerous. I mean, with all due respect to Ukraine, their Black Sea fleet isn't that big, but for Russia, historically, this has been critically important. And to see continued destruction worked against that really has an influence on Russia's ability to not just to conduct or support the war in Ukraine, but on its ability globally to project power out into the Mediterranean, in the Pacific, wherever that fleet might be sent. So every time the Ukrainians sink a component of the Russian Black Sea fleet, they're doing NATO a favor.
When you look at Ukraine carrying out these wartime first operations, does it make you question why Trump is willing to ask Ukraine to make such large concessions when Russia refuses to make any?
Well, Putin has convinced him, and even when Trump wavers, Putin finds another way to convince him that Ukraine doesn't have the cards, that Russia's big. The national security strategy they released last week, which is a kind of a laughable document in many respects, says basically big countries are a factor of history. It's inevitable. And in Trump's mind, if you're a big country, ultimately you're going to win. Well, not necessarily. Not if Ukraine continues to get help from the West in all economic and military forms. But I think it's Putin's ability to play on Trump's weaknesses that's convinced him that the Ukrainians ultimately are going to lose. So since that makes the war senseless, why not just end it now and give Russia what it wants?
Ambassador, I ask you this question every time you're on the program, but I think it's so important to keep asking you as the situation constantly evolves. But if you were the national security advisor right now, what would you be advising Trump on how best to help Ukraine, how to avoid a repeat of World War II, how to avoid more bloodshed, how to avoid more expansionism from Putin?
Well, I don't think Putin's expansionist ambitions stop until he starts suffering defeats. And what we've done for nearly 4 years now, collectively as the West, is we've given Ukraine enough assistance and the quality of assistance not to lose the war. But we have never yet given them either the hardware nor the strategy to repel the aggression. And until that's a reality in the Kremlin, because they have a different calculus of human life than we do, they're going to continue to use military force in Europe. Even if you have a ceasefire in Ukraine, it's just a prelude to the third Russian invasion when they rebuild their military, beef up their economy, and it allows them to turn their attention to other countries like, for example, Moldova, where the Transnistria Republic, which is only recognized by Russia, still has a small number of Russian troops. They could beef up the Russian contingent there. They could endanger Moldova. They would have Ukraine outflanked to the west. They could look to more direct intervention in Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia in the Caucasus. They could put more pressure in cyberspace on Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. This is not going to go away until Putin thinks he really has an opponent on the other side that's determined not to let him take advantage of former parts of the Soviet Union. Right now, he does not think that. And I'm afraid, unfortunately, he's right.
Pakistan is holding talks with Russia on a potential oil sector deal as it looks to expand purchases of cheaper Russian crude oil and refinery and energy projects. But the discussions build on Pakistan's current Russian oil imports that began in 2023. With all these Western sanctions going on, this will fuel more into their wartime economy. But in order to prevent this from happening, more money going into his war machine, should Trump get involved by putting diplomatic pressure on Pakistan or even escalate further sanctions on energy importers of Russian oil?
Well, I think enforcing the sanctions we have now would be an important first step. And Trump has been very erratic in how he's done that. He's added a surcharge tariff on India for continuing to purchase Russian oil, but he's not tariffed China and Pakistan. And talk about people irritated with Trump. That's got the Indian government more than a little irritated. So it's because Trump isn't looking in overall terms. Everything is a discrete question. Everything is a different deal that he could make. And the fact is, again, for almost 4 years now, the West has had sanctions that really have conflicting objectives. Number one, stop the Russians from earning money that they can use to finance the war from their oil exports, but don't cut off so much Russian oil that it increases prices at the pump of gasoline in the consuming Western countries. Ultimately, you can't have it both ways. And I think that if we're serious about cutting off Russian income from selling its hydrocarbons, then you need to get serious about it and enforce them. Now, we have that capability. We've done it before. It could mean interdiction of the ghost fleet of ships at sea. We had an example about a month or so ago of the U.S. interdicting a vessel carrying a Chinese cargo of potentially missile-related parts to Iran, violating UN Security Council sanctions. We've got a lot of potential authorities. The Proliferation Security Initiative could give us authority. But these ghost fleet ships, they claim they're registered under this country's flag, and when that's inconvenient, well, actually, we're registered under this country's flag. They don't turn their transponders on to show their locations. We could enforce the anti-Russia sanctions much more effectively than we are now.
Ambassador, just moving on to China for a minute, a Chinese defense ministry spokesman has publicly urged that the US recalibrate its strategic perception of China. So China said that these remarks are in response to the US national security strategy, as you mentioned before. It included provisions on National Defense Authorization Act linked to Taiwan. Beijing reaffirmed that the One China principle, insisting that Taiwan is a part of China and that its status is an internal matter with no foreign interference. So it accused the US of encouraging pro-independence forces in Taiwan and warned that using Taiwan to contain China will fail. So just for the audience to understand, the US strategy on Taiwan said that the US opposes any unilateral change to the status quo. It supports Taiwan's ability to defend itself, and it warns that coercion of force against Taiwan would have serious consequences. So what are your thoughts on this, the fact that China has urged the US to recalibrate its strategic perception of China?
Well, the strategy is better on Taiwan than on many, many other things. It's not as good as it should be. I wouldn't have written it the way they did. But China has focused on it because Taiwan is so neuralgic for them. And I think Xi Jinping believes that in the past 11 months or so of battling Trump over tariffs, that he has been able to face Trump down. And so as they look forward to Trump's April visit next year, and the potential of a big negotiation on a trade deal, I think Xi Jinping is just upping the pressure on Trump, hoping he'll make a concession on Taiwan, which they don't think Trump cares very much about, and which I think they're right about. But he'll concede something on Taiwan to get what he's often called the biggest trade deal in history. And that's his main focus, and Taiwan is a sideshow for him. So it's notwithstanding, this is probably the best part of the national security strategy. It's obviously the thing the Chinese have focused on because they have at least the belief that they might be able to get Trump to back off the long-standing American position.
What are your thoughts on how you think Xi is perceiving Donald Trump right now in regards to the Russia-Ukraine war?
I think we should keep in mind that Xi and Putin probably talk very frequently about their respective discussions with Trump and compare notes. And I think that Xi reads Trump's utter lack of interest in real security guarantees for Ukraine or the ultimate goal of securing a free and independent Ukraine and translates it immediately into Taiwan and the South China Sea. I think he sees weakness. I think everybody in the world now knows the Wall Street taco saying Trump always chickens out. And when you lose credibility in one area, when you make threats but don't carry through on them, or you talk tough but back away, it affects everybody's perception of how tough you're going to be when it's really down to the crunch on key issues that you want.
Ambassador, just a final question. Donald Trump, he's been copping a lot of backlash in the last day, even from Republicans, for a post that he wrote about the recently murdered Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle. So Trump wrote this about the director. He said that he died due to the anger he caused others through his massive, unyielding, and incurable affliction with a mind-crippling disease known as Trump derangement syndrome, sometimes referred to as TDS. He was known to have driven people crazy by his raging obsession with President Donald Trump, with his obvious paranoia reaching new heights as the Trump administration surpassed all goals and expectations of greatness, and with the golden age of America upon us, perhaps like never before. I mean, Ambassador, what is your reaction to this incredibly tone-deaf response to the death of a director, actor, and his wife from the President of the United States?
Well, it's outrageous. I mean, it's unacceptable behavior for any human being. Trump's not normal. And, we have a saying in this country that a president should be president of all the people, not just the people who elected him. Trump is not president of all the people. In fact, he's only really president of one person, Donald Trump. That's all that really matters. And, we've just been through the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a strong supporter of Trump on his side. And this is when a president should be trying to calm things down, trying to say, look, nobody deserves this, no matter what the reasoning for it. Trump just utterly indifferent to that kind of thing. And it adds, I think, to a growing feeling in Washington over the past 45 days or so that maybe we've passed peak Trump and we're on the downhill slope. Because I think the more people who split with him, even on non-political issues like this, just on issues of what kind of level of civility we need in our public discourse, it shows Trump's moving perhaps more quickly into lame duck status.
Ambassador John Bolton, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report again.
Glad to be with you.